Alrighty, guys. So it is 12:03. We can go ahead and get started here. Just wanted to take a quick moment here before we jump right into things to welcome you all to today's Tableau webinar hosted by Data Meaning. Now, I know that there are a lot of crazy events that are happening in the world right now. So I also wanted to thank you guys for tuning in. And I hope that you guys are all staying safe out there. Having said that, today's session is going to be the first in a series of webinars. And today we will be taking an introductory look at Tableau Desktop and really focus on the core fundamental skills a Tableau developer needs to really be effective. So that is to say, if you are an individual who is maybe considering adding Tableau's visualization platform to their current data analytics practice, or if you've already purchased Tableau and you really just want to get quickly up to speed on how to use the product, absolutely, today's session is going to be perfect for you. Having said that, we'll go ahead and move on here. So a little bit about me before we get started here. So my name is Andrew. I am a professional services consultant / trainer on the Data Meaning enablement team. So a little bit about Data Meaning. We're, you can say, an end-to-end full stack data solutions consultancy. So essentially what that means is we're well-versed in starting that analytics progression, really spinning up your data analytics practice and seeing that all the way through to completion, ending with your reporting component, which is actually what we're going to be focusing on today. We are partners with a wide range of data analytics software companies, with absolutely Tableau being one of them. Now, specifically for me, I specialize in the areas of really implementing those best practices and that standardization component, the automation and ETL side of things. So really getting your data cleaned up, really getting into a state where it can now then be loaded into those tools like Tableau. I also primarily focus on the design / visualization side of things. So really that Tableau component. And then finally, I also focus on the training side of things. So I am Tableau Desktop certified as an associate. And in addition to that, I also am certified by Tableau as a licensed trainer who can teach Tableau Desktop as well as Tableau Prep. Now, I've personally worked with Tableau for around, you'd say about like 6+ years. With experience in the industries of hospitality, financial, that supply chain / retail side of things, as well as the public sector here. I have a couple of pieces of contact information as well. I'll go ahead and show that at the end here as well. Having said that, we can go ahead and move on here. A couple of housekeeping items before we jump right into things. So I really wanted to quickly cover the webinar schedule here. Moving on from that, the lesson plan, so what we're actually going to be taking a look at today. And then finally, or second to last, we'll go ahead and jump right into Tableau Desktop. And then finally, we'll go ahead and save some time for today for some Q&A. Cool. So this is going to be the webinar schedule. We are going to be hosting a webinar every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. I'm currently located on the in DC, so that East Coast here in the US. So on the schedule that we have prepared for you for that content, right? Today we are, of course, taking a look at an introductory look at Tableau Desktop. Moving on for next week, taking a look at Tableau Prep, week after Tableau Server. And for the last 2 weeks, we're going to be taking a deep dive into the various calculations that we can build into Tableau Desktop, as well as the various visuals at the very end to sort of finish us off on that deep dive here on the 5th week. Cool. So for the lesson plan that we have prepared for you today, we'll be taking a look at the sort of that visual analytics side of thing. Of course, Tableau is a visual analytics software, as well as that platform here. So we're going to be taking a look at how we can build those awesome graphs that you may have seen advertised on the Tableau desktop or on the Tableau website. We're going to be utilizing the sample Superstore dataset. So that dataset that comes pre-packaged with Tableau. So if you guys have a version of Tableau installed, it leads me to my next point, which is going to be, this is a very highly interactive session. So at any point, feel free to open up Tableau desktop on your own machines and feel free to follow along as well. I'll show you guys where to find all of the various resources here when we jump right into Tableau. Now, finally, we are going to be covering a bunch of the UI elements. So if you've literally never seen Tableau before, fantastic. This is going to be perfect for you guys, as well as all that beautiful functionality that Tableau has prepackaged and included with the software. So if you point your attention here at the very bottom of this PowerPoint slide, right, we're going to be covering bar graphs, that geospatial or that mapping component, covering tree maps, scatter plots, time series charts, and then finally, we're taking a look at those standard data tables that we all know and love. Now on that functionality side of things, it's just going to be filtering, sorting, really setting up those data connections. So if you've never loaded in data before into Tableau desktop, absolutely, we'll be covering that. And then just some interesting content here. We're going to be taking a look at Viz and Tooltip as well. One of my favorite pieces of functionality. Cool. So we'll go ahead and save that question slide here for after. Let me go ahead and drag in the Tableau desktop view. Cool. Go ahead and jumping right into things. So this is going to be that final view that we're going to be building out here, right? The key use case you can think of, right? Even though we're going to be generalizing this content so that everybody can get a piece of that Tableau content, we primarily focused on taking a look at this data set, that sample Superstore data set, from the lens of an individual who perhaps wants to find issues with profitability across their organization. Now we'll go ahead and go into the intricacies of what that Tableau desktop data connection really offers, right? That sample Superstore data set. But having said that, right, that key component, right, trying to see where we're sort of hemorrhaging that money across our organization, across the various slices here. So we'll be including various components like that filtering component, right? When I click on a specific value, right, how does that affect the view? As well as how can we visually present this in such a way that it's easier for the end user to consume that information as well, right? We don't want to just load up our dashboard with a bunch of content, right? So we'll be focusing on that as well. Now, as we're going through all of this content here, feel free to type into chat or type in the Q&A area located in your Zoom client for any questions that you might have, right? I'll be going through those questions at the very end. So as questions arise, absolutely feel free to type those in. Questions are basically my favorite part. I love walking you guys through and really understanding what you guys are using the product for. So having said that, I'll go ahead and jump right into Tableau here. So this is going to be Tableau Desktop's landing page, right? That start page. This is going to be what you're going to be looking at when you open up a new instance of Tableau. So really quickly taking a look at the user interface over here on the left here, right? Oh, that is an arrow. We have our connect pane. This is going to allow you guys to connect to a bunch of various data sources that Tableau comes preloaded with their respective connectors. So for example, right off the bat, we have Microsoft Excel, right? One of those most widely used data source connections. We have those CSV connections and absolutely even statistical files as well as your spatial files, right? So if you have a spatial package that you want to load in here, absolutely Tableau does have that functionality included. Now, a bit more ubiquitous across implementations and industries, right? We have the server component, right? So if you're working for a more enterprise scaled level company, right? Usually the data is housed in some kind of data server. So taking a look at that, right, we have Microsoft SQL Server, MySQL, Oracle, but even beyond that, if I go ahead and clear the screen, notice we have that more option located here. So if I go ahead and click on that more option, if you don't see your server listed, right, this is just a really small slice of the various data connections that you can actually connect to. Right? We absolutely do have a bunch of preloaded connectors that Tableau absolutely comes preloaded with. Fantastic package and list of connections here. So at the end of the day, also, if you do not see your connection, you do have an ODBC driver here. You can absolutely add those in as well. Cool. Now we'll go ahead and touch on this a bit briefly later here, but we also do have a bunch of saved data sources. You can almost think of these as bookmarks to previously created data sources. Let's say that you've built out your Tableau data set, you've loaded it in, you've made a bunch of changes to the metadata. Right? You don't necessarily want to make those changes again. Absolutely, you can save bookmarks to those data sources so that you don't have to constantly have to make those changes every single time you want to connect up to that data. Having said that, go ahead and look at the main area of our landing start page. Right in the middle here, you can see all of our, you can almost think of this as the, if you have ever used Microsoft Excel or Word, right, that recently used list. You can see here that finished copy of that workbook I just showed you guys. I already saved it on my computer. So because I've utilized Tableau in order to build that out, I've recently used it, we see that workbook here. Even more importantly, or equally as importantly, we do absolutely have some sample workbooks that Tableau has built out. So if you guys are going through your own Tableau endeavors, right, and you're attending this webinar, you want more information, sample workbooks are a fantastic method of really deconstructing what Tableau sees as an effective use case of Tableau. And if you don't necessarily see your specific industry, clicking on more samples will absolutely bring you to a list of all of the various sample workbooks that Tableau has built out. The three that you see here are just going to be those that Tableau has pre-built out and pre-packaged and included with the software, with Tableau Desktop. Now, over here on the right side, really quickly covering this, right? Let me go ahead and clear these lines here. Right? We have the Discover pane. At the very top with the training header, we have getting started, et cetera, that list of training videos. So even beyond this webinar, if you guys have a need or a want to expand your Tableau knowledge, really make that next step over, you can absolutely click on these training videos, and that is a fantastic resource. I personally still even use them, even with all that Tableau experience I mentioned earlier. We also have right below that the resources tab. So this is almost sort of like the, I almost call it like this social tab, right? It contains much more than just that social component, the forums, fantastic place to ask questions, but it also has blogs as well as new product offerings. So if you take a look here at the very top, we have Get Tableau Prep, right? One of those recent additions to the Tableau platform. You can absolutely get some information on that. And then finally, we have sort of that relevant news area at the very bottom here. So if you guys are familiar with Tableau conference, right, you may see a link to get tickets there. Or as I mentioned earlier, in light of recent events, right, we absolutely do see a link to the COVID-19 space that Tableau has created officially with the product here on their website. But having said that, we can absolutely go ahead and move on here. So jumping right into the meat and potatoes of things, we're going to absolutely be using a Microsoft Excel data set here for today. If you have a different data connection, I will say that Tableau is data agnostic. So once you load in that data, right, Tableau is going to look and feel all the same. Fantastic, fantastic functionality of Tableau. So I'm going to go ahead here and just simply by left clicking Microsoft Excel. Once I do that, we'll see a resulting window pop up here. So we see that we have that file explorer. Now, if you're on Mac OS X, right, that may look a bit different, but at the end of the day, all we're doing is we're pointing Tableau to that correct location. So for those of us at home who are following along, right, that's going to be found in your specific user area, in your documents folder, my Tableau repository. Go ahead and zoom in here. Right, yeah, that documents folder, my Tableau repository, your data sources, your specific version, and then finally, your localization. Now, I am in the US, but for those of us who may be in a different country, absolutely, go ahead and choose your localization. Tableau does support a wide range of languages as well as countries here. Now, the specific data set we're going to be focusing on is going to be that sample Superstore data set. You guys are working off of a different version than me. You might see different year values, different values, but at the end of the day, it's the same data set here. So I'm going to go ahead and either by double clicking or by manually left clicking the open option here in the bottom right hand corner of that resulting window, will open us up to the data source connection page here. So at the very bottom here, notice that there is a couple of tabs. So we have the data source tab, and we'll be taking a look at these sheet tabs here in just a second. So if you don't see the screen, absolutely, you can manually left click the data source area. You can define that data set connection. Now, just like how SQL Server or those, or MySQL or Oracle, right? You definitely do have the ability to create multiple tables worth of information. You don't necessarily need to fit all of your information in one table. Similarly, in Excel, we do have the ability to create multiple Excel worksheets, right? Multiple sheets worth of information. You can think of those as tables here. So relating that knowledge for you guys. And what we're going to go ahead and do here is if I go ahead and focus, right? We can see that initial connection, that connection to the sample Superstore data set, that Excel sheet. And then right below here, we absolutely do get to see the worksheets area. Now, if you guys are working with a server-based data set, absolutely, you might see this a bit differently. You might see tables and relevant functionality related to that server. But at the end of the day, right, what we're planning on doing is dragging our tables into the view so that Tableau can actually maintain a connection to that table here. So what I'm actually going to go ahead and do is focusing on the orders worksheet here, that orders Excel worksheet. I'm going to go ahead and manually left click that orders sheet and drag that into the area, which is very aptly named the drag tables here area. See that text here. So once I drag and drop that, we'll notice is Tableau will absolutely be able to relate that information. Tableau has loaded it in. Tableau has read that data. We can now start to build out our various data sets as well as visuals here. So we'll let that marinate here for just a second. Notice at the very bottom, we do have that preview populated with all of our data. And then at the very bottom here, what I'm actually going to go ahead and do, focusing on the Sheet 1 tab, I'm going to manually left click here. We'll go ahead and start our journey building out our various visuals here. So clicking on Sheet 1 will bring us to our worksheet editor view. This is where we get to make some changes, some very light changes to the data set, right? Tableau is a read-only tool, or Tableau Desktop, I should say, is a read-only tool. So any changes that you make here won't necessarily be reflected in your Excel worksheets. If I were to manually find that sample Superstore Excel worksheet, right, I wouldn't necessarily see my changes there, but rather the changes that we make inside of Tableau will affect the metadata housed entirely within Tableau. So you have that peace of mind. You won't break any tables inside of your source data here. Now at the very top here, I'll go ahead and zoom in, right? The first chunk of our data source or our data pane here is going to be our dimensions. So really focusing on the core components of a Tableau before we jump into the visuals, right? You can think of our dimensions as those categorical fields, right? How do we want to slice our data? How do we want to describe our data? So for example, we can break down our various values by customer ID, for example, customer name, really relating that time component, order date, as well as, I mean, we could absolutely use region as well if we so chose. At the very bottom here, we do have, sort of separated by that gray line here, our measures. So our measures are going to be that quantitative information, right? That information that really brings that context to our view, right? We could be viewing our information at region, but what are we looking at by region, right? We could be summing up our sales. We could be taking the average discount, right? That maximum profit housed within each region here. This is gonna allow us to really visualize and really bring some value into our view. Now, the key component here that separates our dimensions versus our measures is going to be that aggregation component, right? Because when you look at your profits, you're not just looking at the straight profit values. You would want to aggregate them up to the level that you set And we'll cover that here in a little bit. But those aggregation functions, you can think of them as like max, sum, min, average, et cetera, counts, count distinct. We'll cover that here in just a second. Cool. So having said that, taking a really quick look here at our pre-built workbook here, our pre-built dashboard. Notice that we have individual worksheets here that sort of house one visual. All right, so looking at the manufacturer sales versus profit, the monthly sales performance, we have all these wonderful visuals, but we do want to relate them together. So at the end of the day, we're going to be housing them all within one dashboard, which is what I'm showing you guys here. So this is what we're going to be building up to. So let's go ahead and start off here with our, for example, our product KPIs worksheet, right? That worksheet that contains that really granular at the individual level of our products that we have offered inside of our data set. And then we can absolutely go ahead and add in those measures that I just mentioned earlier. So if I go ahead here, going over to Tableau, right, that fresh new worksheet, let's go ahead and also move this away. Drag in, quite simply at this point, product name. So really focusing on how we can build that view. We have our rows shelf. I'm gonna go ahead and drag in product name manually by left clicking and dragging and dropping that into that rows area. So left clicking and dragging. And notice when I do that, Tableau absolutely will add in those values presented in the view. Now I can go ahead and absolutely, for example, dragging in our discounts. But if we take a look at those discount values, the values may look a bit weird. So if we zoom in here, notice that we have some discount values that are above 1. So if you want to think of these as percentage values, right? We're essentially saying here that we've given this 3.6 cubic foot counter, et cetera, a discount of 260%, which may not make too much sense, right? So we can absolutely make some changes here. So if I right click my discount field, go ahead and zoom in, right clicking that discount field, going over to our default properties, I'm gonna go ahead and specifically set that aggregation, right? That word I mentioned earlier that specifically relates to our measures. I'm gonna set that default aggregation to average. Now that doesn't necessarily do anything for me at this point inside of the view. However, if I go ahead here, left clicking and dragging that discount field and replacing the field that we had initially dragged in, that initial discount field, will absolutely give us our averages here. Now, I did mention that we are going to be looking at our discount field, our discount measure within the context of a percentage. And that can be easily changed here in that same exact area that we found that default aggregation. So right clicking that discount field one more time, going to that default properties area, and notice we'll see that number formats option. So again, right clicking that field in our data pane, going down to default properties and left clicking number format, will open up a formatting editor window. So going to percentage, right, notice that we do have a couple of options. So in the list, we had number standard, number custom, currency custom, scientific, as well as a custom area to format our values. We'll go ahead and take a look at a couple of these, but at the end of the day, I'm gonna go ahead and set this to, let's say, 0 decimal places. So we're gonna be returning a whole number here for our percentage values. Now take a quick look at our values here, right? So like, for example, 3M replacement filter, notice how that visually changes inside of the view. So just as I mentioned earlier, notice that that value is now formatted as 25%. However, Tableau is still reading that data as 0.25. And at the end of the day, any value, any calculation that we build off of this won't necessarily be read as the text value 25%, but rather that value of 0.25. So this is a visual change that is primarily just for the end user's readability for that value here. So zooming out, go ahead and do the same. Now, Tableau is great in that you can absolutely use the functionality that you're used to with Windows, with that Mac OS X. So if I go ahead and hold down Control here, right? Notice how I can multi-select these values. What I'm actually going to go ahead and do is I'm going to click and drag one of these highlighted fields, right, on top of this area defined right here, that area that houses all of those discount numbers at this point. So if I go ahead and drag in those values, notice that Tableau will absolutely build me a cross-tabbed view containing all of the relevant information I might care about. So I go ahead here, taking a quick scan of our values. Notice that profits on formatting. Maybe we want to visit that here in just a second. But we also have our quantity values. And then finally, our sales value also not formatted here as well. So I'll go ahead and do that control click trick one more time, multi-select profit and sales. We'll go ahead and format these before moving on. So right-clicking profit and sales, going down to default properties one last time, and notice number format here at the very top, right? That zooming in, that number format. Now, it doesn't matter if you right-click profit or sales, but just right-clicking one of those highlighted fields will allow you to change the formatting for both of them. So I'll go ahead and zoom out, go through that procedure. And then finally, I'll go ahead and let's say I want to format this as currency, but not just the standard currency, right? We could absolutely set the localization. So if you wanted to use the Japanese yen or the British pound, for example, you can absolutely do so. But I'm going to go ahead and set this to be a bit more of a customized currency formatting, if you will. So I'll go ahead and set this to 0 decimal places. Display units, I'll go ahead and leave that as is, but this would allow you to switch the display units, if you will, to thousands with a K, millions, M, billions, B, or billions with a G. And that's something that Tableau will automatically handle. You absolutely do have the ability to change the negative values. But I think that's good for now, so I'll go ahead and hit OK. And notice we've absolutely applied those changes here, right? We do get to see those beautiful dollar signs as we've formatted those values. So we'll let that marinate for a couple of minutes before moving on. Cool. So I'm all about best practices, right? It's one of those things I sort of staked my experience on, all right? So I'll go ahead here, and just as a really quick best practice, as you're developing, you do want to make sure that your views are visually apparent, as well as that they are named aptly. So for example, with sheet one is not very visually apparent, right? If an end user saw sheet one, right, they'd think, well, what is sheet one? So I can absolutely either double click or right click that sheet. And at the very top here, sort of that sixth option down, we have that rename option. So I'll go ahead and rename this worksheet real quick to, let's say, for example, product KPIs, right? Those key performance indicators that we really care about. Now, I did mention that we did want to focus on those products that are unprofitable, right? Making sure that we capture those unprofitable fields. However, if we just take a really quick scan here, right? Notice that we're not only visualizing those unprofitable products, but we also are visualizing those products with positive profits. So we may want to perhaps filter these values out, but at this point, I'll leave it as is. And just to further drive the point in home, right? Notice that we have over 1,800 rows worth of data multiplied by 4 columns, resulting in over 7,400 individual cells worth of information, right? In my personal experience, it doesn't really matter how smart you are, how much you understand the individual business, right? At the end of the day, it's really hard for an individual to consume all that information. So we'll go ahead and focus on sort of paring down this data, really focusing on those values that we care about. So having said that, we'll go ahead and put a pin on this view for right now. What I'll go ahead and do is select new worksheet. So that icon right next to that worksheet that we just created, I'm going to go ahead and click this icon right here. That will open up a fresh new worksheet for us to now edit and interact with. So we have our product KPIs list. If you ever want to go back to it, absolutely, we can click on the data source if you want to make any edits to the connectivity information. But I'll go ahead and focus on sheet 2. So starting right off the bat, let's say that we can now focus on a higher level dimension, a higher level slice of our data set here. So just out of some background business acumen, I'll say that category and a subcategory are going to be those higher level fields, right? So every single product rolls up to a subcategory, and each subcategory will roll up to a further higher category here. So I can either control click, dragging in one of those highlighted fields to rows, or go ahead and manually left click and drag category to rows. That'll give us furniture. Zooming in here, furniture, office supplies, and technology. And I can do the same thing, dragging subcategory adjacent to the rows as well. That'll build out that view here. It gives you a bit more control over the overall layout of the view, right? How we're actually viewing these fields here. Now notice we do have ABCs. Now initially I showed you guys before, right? We dragged in discounts into that area. However, in this case, let's say that I want to focus on sales as a bar chart, right? You can absolutely do so. So instead of dragging in sales to those ABCs, right? Instead of dragging sales to text, for example, I'm going to go ahead and drag sales instead to the column shelf, right above the row shelf. And what we'll notice is Tableau will automatically switch my view, automatically recognize that we do want to see a bar chart here. Now focusing on the marks card, notice marks card being this area I'm highlighting in red. Notice that the dropdown here says automatic with the bar chart icon already selected. So Tableau has seen all of the developer interactions, we've interacted with the product in such a way that Tableau is automatically starting to make certain assumptions for us. Awesome. So moving on. Let's say that this view, while it is fantastic and it was really quick to build this view, maybe it doesn't contain all of the information that we care about. So what we can go ahead and do is add some color, add some Tableau flair to this view. So what I'll go ahead and do is drag in my profit field, add in some additional context because we do want to focus on that profitability aspect. And I'm going to drag that into our colors shelf here, right? That color shelf found in the marks card. So left clicking and dragging that profit field to color. Notice how that'll change the view here, right? Notice how that now shows us not only our sales, right? The magnitude of our sales. So for example, copiers, right, is 149,000 in sales, while it may be the lowest selling or the lowest selling subcategory in our technology category. We can see with that extra added context that it perhaps may be the most profitable. So we might not need to worry about that. Having said that, focusing on our tables view, notice that the bar chart, while it is the second highest selling subcategory in our furniture category, maybe perhaps we do want to focus on this subcategory. As shown by that orange coloration, right? That negative coloration for our profits. Cool. So I'll let that marinate for a little bit before moving on. And of course, as always, that best practice here, we do want to make sure that we rename our fields. So I'll go ahead and call this, let's say, category sales and profits. Cool. So taking a look at the original view, right, we've already banged out two of these worksheets that we want to build out. So for example, our product KPIs on the bottom right-hand corner of our dashboard, as well as the category sales and profits worksheet that we have in the upper left-hand corner. We'll go ahead and focus on that geospatial component now. And this will actually bring us to the data types that we might want to focus on when bringing in our values into Tableau, when bringing in our data set into Tableau. So opening up a new worksheet, we'll go ahead and put a pin on this category sales and profit view for right now. Going over to the new worksheet by clicking on that icon again one more time, right? That'll open up sheet 3, that fresh, brand new worksheet for us to build out these beautiful visuals. Let's say that I want to focus on the state level view. So I'll go ahead and drag this to detail, right? That dimension to detail. And notice what happens to the visual, right? Tableau was able to visualize for us that beautiful map that we care about, right? So instead of having to just use those visuals that we've come to know and love, right? The data table, right? That's that table that contains all of these stock values that we've seen, you know, that Excel component, as well as the bar charts view. We can absolutely start to branch out inside of our Tableau experience and functionality to start to build out these newer visuals here. And now Tableau was able to absolutely build this view out because we take a really close look here next to the state field in our dimensions pane, in our data pane here. Tableau sort of visualized our data type shown by these icons through a globe icon. Now, unfortunately, it took me quite a few years into my Tableau experience to actually recognize this as a globe. I personally think it as like almost like a soccer ball or a tennis ball, but however you remember it, just know that this is going to be our geospatial, our geographic region field icon. And notice that all I added in to Tableau was an Excel file. I didn't necessarily add in a Tableau specific file. Tableau was able to parse through all the values in our state field and was able to absolutely identify it as a geographic region. Now, if I go ahead and manually left click this area, right, this icon, I do absolutely have the ability to change this specific geographic region. So sometimes Tableau may need some extra help, right? Tableau's automatically doing all of this, adding all this functionality in for us automatically. So if we do absolutely need to change the geographic role at all, Tableau needs some extra help, we can absolutely do so by manually left clicking that icon and changing it here. But I'll say that Tableau, fantastic tool, so I was able to do everything right off the bat. So zooming out, these dots, while very nice, this map, while absolutely beautiful, may need some extra added context. So because we are staying in line with that focus on our profitability, I'll go ahead and drag that field, that profits measure, to our colors shelf. Now we're gonna go ahead and see that automatic sort of functionality here in action one more time. So once I left click and drag my sum of profit field, dragging that into that color shelf in our marks card, notice that Tableau automatically switched those individual small circles into a filled map view. So each of these color chunks relating to a specific state will actually be clickable. You can interact with them. Absolutely. These are going to interact like just any other visual that you build out in Tableau. It's fully interactive here. Now, I hope nobody hears from Texas, but unfortunately, inside of this data set, Texas is currently the least profitable state here. So this may be an indication that we do want to dig further deeper into our data analysis here. So I'll go ahead and call this state profits, right? Making sure that we're adhering to those best practices as much as possible. I'll go ahead and put a pin on this view and go over to our fourth visual that we have, which is going to be our tree map. Now, you guys may have heard of this as a heat map or some other non-Tableau specific terminology. But when relating it to Tableau, we specifically are going to call this next visual a tree map. So let's say that I do want to be able to relate, for example, our regional dimensions, our regional values to our subcategory values. So what I'll go ahead and do here is I'll manually left click and drag my region fields by multi-selecting region as well as subcategory, adding that to the details. And initially Tableau will visualize for us these sad little squares. Right off the bat, these may not be very effective, may not be very valuable to you guys, but what I'll go ahead and do is before we actually build out that tree map, manually left click region, adding that to that color shelf, adding in region to colors so we can see that we're now slicing those squares. And now to really add in that valuable component here, I'll go ahead and drag in sales and add that into size. What we'll see is Tableau is going to dramatically change this view. Right? So once I've added sales to that size shelf, notice that Tableau automatically populated everything, is now sizing those sad little squares into these awesome larger squares, right? Tableau's utilizing all of the white space, all of that dead space inside of the view. We're now able to visualize all of these individual slices of, for example, the upper left-hand corner for the region West specifically for the subcategory chairs, right, we accumulated a value of 101,000. Now, as I'm building this out, notice that not only has our marks card been automatically changing the mark type, right, the shape that we're visualizing, but also, in this case, the only legend that we have is our region legend. For example, with our state profits, the main difference being we do have a profitability legend here that allows us to really dig deep into the values, like what does this orange really mean in terms of our profitability. We go over to our category sales and profit. We absolutely do have that extra added context. But for our values here, right, there's really no sizing legend. But with the added functionality of this tree map, what we can actually do is drag in another instance of our sales to the labels shelf. Right. So we're now starting to add in that additional context here. I'll go ahead and, for example, control click highlighting region and subcategory. And this is actually one of my favorite pieces of functionality. If you hold down control, left click and drag these two dimensions into the label shelf, holding down control the entire time, letting go of your left click first, and then letting go of your control key. Notice that we are able to add both of these dimensions into the view. I'll go ahead and add in profit for good measure into the labels. And before we put a pin on this view, before we even rename everything, I'm going to go ahead and actually change the text labeling to adjust the view itself, right? The order in which we're actually presenting this information, right? Because the end user, if an end user were to open up this dashboard, right, they would see 101,000. 4,000, but not really know what that information means. So I'll go ahead and click on the label shelf. This will open up a new window. And if I go ahead and specifically select those three dots next to the text label area, notice that that will open up a text editor. You can think of this as like a word editor or something like that. So I'll go ahead and call this the region. Notice how my static text is going to be differently colored or differently highlighted than the dynamic text, right? That regional dynamic text. I'll go ahead and call this profits, sales, and subcategory. We'll go ahead and abbreviate this for right now. Now, I did mention I did want to adjust the order, so I'll go ahead and cut this text by clicking on Control X. Right. And then I'll go ahead and do the same exact for the profits. Let's say I want to put that first. And then finally, I'll go ahead and adjust everything. We can absolutely get rid of this dead space here at the very top. And if I go ahead and hit OK, notice how that now changes the view. So I see subcategory first, right? Our chairs in the West region, our profits were $4,000. And then finally, we have our sales field here as well at the very bottom. So we'll go ahead and put a pin on this view. We'll go ahead and call this, let's say, regional subcategory sales and profits. Maybe not the most inspired naming convention, but it is effective. It tells the end user exactly what they're seeing here. So I'll go ahead and we're running up on our last two visuals here. Clicking on a new worksheet here, adding that in. We can go ahead and focus on that scatter plot view that I did promise we would build out. So dragging in first initially, let's do, for example, our customers. Let's do customer name, drag that into details. Left clicking sales. I'm gonna go ahead and add that to my columns. Right? Notice how that's sort of changes the view into this crazy bar chart here. And then I'll also, in order to really build out that scatter plot component, right, we're comparing two measures, two quantitative pieces of information. We have our scatter plot view built out. Now, this may be way too dense of a view here. So we can actually do, of course, adding that extra added context here. Let's go ahead and, for example, add in our customer segments. So dragging that field into our colors, really slicing our information by the individual customers. We can absolutely add that in. And the fantastic thing about this legend here on the upper right-hand corner, focusing on this area right here, is if I go ahead and click on consumer, that'll bring that focus into the view. Corporate, home office, right? we're essentially bringing that slice of information into the forefront, into that focus of our view. So for example, with this view, even though it contains a bunch of values here, right? Essentially just under 800 individual points of information, we can absolutely highlight these slices in order to figure out which value we may want to focus on. So I'll go ahead and call this customer sales versus profits. We can go ahead and put a pin on this view for now. The last view, you may have not seen it inside of our final complete dashboard. Go ahead and cover why. That's sort of a best practices thing, but we do want to show you guys that timeline, that time series view, right? Because the date component, extremely important. So let's go ahead and I'll go ahead and drag an order date into our columns. Notice how inside of our data set, right? If I go ahead and left click this view data option next to the search bar at the very top of our data pane. If I scroll over to order dates, put that into the view, right? Notice our order date is being brought in currently at the individual month, day, year level. However, Tableau automatically changed that slice of information to just at the year level. That's something that Tableau automatically does. And that's further illustrated, if I go ahead and zoom in, by that year function that's being added to that order date field. So I go ahead here and right click year. Notice that there is going to be that day option, and inside of that preview, we have May 8th, 2015. So I'll go ahead and actually initialize that, click that option here for our day values. Notice how that will now generate for us our axes, right? That day of order date axis here, that timeline axis. So in this case, I'll go ahead, make it simple. I'll just drag in my profit field to the rows. And notice how Tableau is now automatically starting to aggregate those values at the day level, providing us our profits per each day. Now, let's say that I want to change this profit value to, or our axes to a level that's higher than day, right? Because this is sort of a crazy view, right? We have too many values here. So what I can go ahead and do is right click that day of order date field one last time. And let's say I just want to see this at the month level, right? So selecting that month option that says May 2015 in that example area. Absolutely, this will allow us to change the context, that level at which we're summing up or aggregating our profit values. Now, this is sort of going to be that timeline view. Absolutely, we get to see that line chart that's sort of really relatable to our time series charts. But if I wanted to choose a different mark, we can go off the set trail that Tableau has provided for us. Right? Tableau does have a bunch of flexibility. I can absolutely select, for example, the bar option if I so chose. Now we can see that there is going to be a continuous range starting at the beginning of our data set. We can say that that was January 2016 all the way to the final point in our data set, which was December 2019. Right, we can see those values here. So I'll go ahead and call this our monthly profitability. Cool. Now, at this point, we built out all of the necessary components, right? While all of these individual worksheets are fantastic in the information that they provide us, we have yet to relate them together, right? So we do want to get that list of KPIs, that list of products that will show us those unprofitable products, right, in a much more condensed, pared down list. However, at this point, there's really no way to relate Texas's values to these individual product names, right? There's no way to really relate tables, that most unprofitable subcategory to the product KPIs worksheet. So in order to do so, we're gonna go ahead and start to add in a new tab here, right? That new dashboard tab that allows us to relate all of those worksheets together. What I can go ahead and do here is drag this pane out. So this is gonna be sort of similar to that worksheets editor view in which we have that main area where we can edit or add in our values. But instead of various data columns here, data fields, we instead have a dashboard layout view. So in that first tab here, our dashboards, we have all of the individual worksheets. So this sort of takes the place of all of those fields that we saw before. And if I go ahead and start to build this out, let's say that I'm going to bring in my product KPIs list in initially, right? Notice how that will now add in all of our individual data points. However, there is a bunch of dead space here, right? I don't necessarily, as a visual analytics user and developer, all of this dead white space does hurt me. So I do want to get rid of this as much as possible. So if I go ahead here, clicking on this drop down here at the very top where it says standard, I'm going to go ahead and manually left click that. I'm going to set Tableau to fit this to the width. Notice how Tableau will automatically stretch my worksheet out to now show me those values. I'll go ahead and manually click these headers for the product name so that I can see a much greater view of all these individual product KPIs. Maybe go ahead and reduce this a bit. I'll go ahead and just start to freeform drag these in and out. Now, if you guys are following along at home, you may not be able to build the same view. That's completely fine. At this point, you can go ahead and take some artistic freedom here and build out the view that you think is effective. All right, I'll go ahead and further drag in that category sales and profit field. Notice how that automatically brought in that legend here. I can go ahead and remove this. Don't want to clutter up my space too much. Tableau will automatically ask me if I want to delete this. Hitting delete containers absolutely will allow me to tell Tableau, yes, I do want to delete that, that area. I'll do the same exact thing that I did before. Notice all that, again, that dead space here. I want to go ahead and remove that as much as possible. So clicking on that worksheet, selecting that dropdown at the very top one more time, and selecting, let's say, entire view at this point. Notice how Tableau will stretch those bars as well as each individual row to accommodate that space. So I'll go ahead here and moving forward, let's do customer sales and profits. I'll drag that right below my, go ahead and we actually just saw that I filtered accidentally on chairs. That's no problem. My second favorite functionality, there is that undo button. So if you ever make a change that you don't necessarily want to make, you can absolutely undo as many times as you want. I could potentially undo all of these changes to the point where I'm starting off with a fresh new workbook that has nothing added into it. So having said that, I'll go ahead and add in my customer sales versus profits, right? Further reducing these legends, deleting them as they come up. And then finally, I'll go ahead and add in my regional subcategory sales and profits. Deleting that container as well. I'll go ahead and there is some dead space here. One last time, fitting this to the entire view will allow us to stretch this view out. Now notice that there is going to be this gray space here on the far right side, as well as right below the dashboard area. This is going to be because of our layout currently. So when the end user opens up a dashboard, I'll go ahead and highlight this in blue. This is what they're going to see with this specific sizing. So if you do want to increase the sizing, we don't necessarily need to stick with this. Clicking on the dropdown found right below the size area will allow me to either specifically set the height and width to a specific pixel boundary, or if I just want Tableau to handle everything, absolutely, I can click on that fixed size option, that dropdown, and select automatic. This will allow Tableau to stretch everything out. But having said that, last two components I do want to speak on before opening up the floor for any questions is the fact that we do have two remaining values here. So we do have state profits as well as monthly profitability, as well as that filtering and the sorting component here. So if I go ahead here and hover over product KPIs, we did want to focus primarily our profits field. So I'll go ahead and click on that profits field, sorting everything down in descending order, or rather clicking on that one last time, right? Notice how there is an icon that pops up when I hover over that area. I do want to see those unprofitable areas first. Finally, we do want to get into that filtering component, but before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and navigate over the regional subcategory sales. Just as a best practice, generally want to limit the amount of visuals inside of your view. So if I go ahead and click on the tooltips option, go ahead and show you guys one of my favorite tricks here. Right, notice how that will automatically open up a tooltip editor. Clicking on insert, hovering over that first sheets option, I'll go ahead and add in the state profits. What that will do is inside of that dashboard, notice now whenever I go ahead and hover over a specific subcategory and region combination, I do absolutely get to see a map inside of that tooltip. Finally, what I'll go ahead and do is include that filtering component here, and that's going to be quite easily added in by clicking on a worksheet. So for example, let's say I wanted to specifically focus on the tables subcategory. I can absolutely click on the funnel icon. If I go ahead and hover over it, notice that there is a tooltip that pops up as use as filter. I'll go ahead and select that icon here. making sure that it's filled in. Notice that I'm able to now left-click tables. And now the entire dashboard is filtered based off of that specific slice of information. The best part is you can absolutely mix and combine these options as well. So if I go ahead here, deselect tables, add in furnitures as that slice of data. Let's say I want to focus on the West region. Absolutely, I can do so as well. So I've currently filtered everything down to the tables inside of the West region. And notice how I absolutely get to see that much more highly pared down view of our data. Now, this is going to bring us to the end of this first session here. So I'll go ahead and flip back over to the PowerPoints, right? Really quickly, last 2 minutes here, I'll go ahead and cover this information. If you do have any questions, we do have a couple of places you can reach out to us. So here's my LinkedIn information, my email. Absolutely drop us a line at datameaning.com. We also are going to publish this webinar as a recording to YouTube. And then finally, if you want to join us for next week on the 21st at 12 p.m. Eastern, right, we're going to be focusing on Tableau prep, right, that ETL component. So I do want to make sure that you guys have the last minute here to ask any questions. So feel free to type into chat. But if there is nothing else, we can go ahead and end the webinar for today. Go ahead and stay on the line here for a couple of minutes here. Excellent. So we are coming up on the last couple of seconds here in this webinar. Do want to thank you guys again for joining us. Won't keep you guys past 1, but absolutely, if you have any questions moving forward, feel free to drop me a line or contact us on the various links here. Having said that, I'll go ahead and see you guys next week. We'll end the webinar here for today. Again, you guys are wonderful. All of your wonderful questions here. Fantastic. And I hope you guys got some value out of today. So I'll go ahead and end everything here. I'll see you guys next week.